Hello and welcome to this episode of Fresh Start. Today I'm really excited because I'm joined by my big sister Kerry, who has very kindly agreed to come on and talk to us today and share our own experience of being born into blended families and being the children of divorce. And I think there's not enough discussion around this topic and the implications of what that means for people growing up. So thank you so much, Kerry, for agreeing, because I know this isn't kind of something you would usually do. So thank you for coming on. And just to kind of get us started and just to kind of give people a little bit of a background. So Kerry and I share the same dad, but we both have different mums. We are a very, very blended family. There are 6 children as a result, which, is made up of, full blood, half blood, step brothers and sisters. And of us 6, 5 of us have gone on to get divorced, and Kerry and I included. So that's why I really wanted to share today our experience of what that's been like and the implications of our own childhood and our decisions as adults and as women and the relationships we're now in today, and to really share our experience in the hope that it will help those who are either going through divorce or trying to manage this better for their children, or who are the children of divorce and are trying to not recreate the same mistakes as their parents, because as I've just mentioned, it's so common to see those kind of patterns immerse in families. So just to kind of bring people up to speed, I guess, and give them a bit of background. So obviously, Kerry, you were, so our dad was married to your mum when they were quite young, and they had our brother and then yourself, and then they divorced when you were how old?
Probably about 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember much about it?
Not really, I suppose, because I was so young. I don't really remember Dad being there when I was young. I just sort of remember really him not being there and visiting weekends, really.
Okay.
But I didn't, and sorry.
No, go, carry on.
And I think as well, I haven't really got an unhappy memory of my childhood and of being young and when Dad wasn't there. I think as well, because then I used to visit him the weekend. We saw him every weekend. And then we'd go and visit our cousins with our extended family. So it was always a happy occasion. We was with lots of people and family all the time. And then I had a good relationship with my mum where we lived, and I had it was a sense of community. I think because we lived on an estate, like with the flats, we had lots of friends and it was community. And then, as I say, being with our cousins, there was never an unhappy occasion or unhappy time that I can remember in my childhood. Mm-hmm. And then our dad obviously was with your mum, and I had wonderful times with her. I'd spend times with her and, weekends, in holidays. And I think I did things with your mum, like your mum took me swimming, which I loved because my mum never swam and still doesn't to this day. And your mum's a fantastic cook, as we all know. So we used to cook with her and bake. And I loved that. I loved spending time with her. And then, Denise was born and you were born, and then it was a happy occasion. And then there was a more extended family. So I can't honestly say that I had an unhappy childhood.
Do you remember when you were introduced to my mum? Do you remember how early on that was, or whether you had time with Dad before being introduced to his new partner?
I can't actually remember that. No.
I just wonder, because that's often something that people really struggle with, is when do you introduce your children to someone new? So as far as you can remember, you don't really remember a time when my mum wasn't there?
No.
Okay.
I don't think I do actually, no.
Okay, interesting. No. And in the sense of the relationship between our dad and your mum, was there any kind of saying things about each other, or any awkwardness or arguing or anything like that you experienced? Never?
No, never. The only time I knew that when Dad used to phone and my mum used to say, your dad's on the phone, and her tone would change. Like she never said a bad word, there was never any arguments, but her tone would slightly change, so I knew it was Dad on the phone. And that was it. There was never any arguments, nothing at all. She never said a bad word about Dad, never sort of run him down to us, nothing at all. Never mentioned your mum, nothing was ever said.
That's really good. See, so that's really interesting. So then obviously our dad met my mum and had, as you say, our other sister and me, and then our dad and my mum divorced when I was 2. So sadly that marriage didn't work out either. And in a very different scenario, in the sense that they actually did say things about one another, and they actually really did struggle to co-parent together throughout my childhood until I was 16, and dad stopped paying maintenance for me, and then they actually managed to get on fine, and there was grandchildren at that point. And I know that dad used to go around and have a cup of tea with mum whenever she was looking after our niece. And there was, family occasions that we would get together, but up until that point it was a much more fractured relationship than, by the sounds of things, what dad had with your mum. So it's interesting how, even though same man in the center of it, has a very different co-parenting relationship with his 2 ex-wives, who he has 2 children with both. And the difference in that, and I guess the scenario around the end of the marriage, and the feelings that were kind of left and unresolved, I guess. Because actually I know growing up that I've had many family occasions where your mum's been present, and our stepmum, and we've done days out. And we were all out the other week for your son's birthday, and I was sat next to your mum, and we were reminiscing about all the days out and trips we've had, and there was never any hostility from your mum to me or our other sister about the fact that we were the children from the next marriage. There was never any resentment from your mum from that perspective. So it sounds as though your mum's kind of managed to let go of a lot of, if there was any, she's certainly not shown any of that to us children, her own or or anybody else's, or dad's children. So so the way she's handled that has had a massive impact, which sadly dad and my mum weren't able to do. And there was a lot of pain and bitterness, I think, over the years. Did you ever at any point think, I wish mum and dad were together?
No, not at all, because I wouldn't have Denise and I wouldn't have you. I wouldn't have your children or Denise's children or an extended family. So no, I never ever thought that.
And even when you were little?
No, because I didn't have an unhappy time to think, oh, I'm really unhappy, I really wish my mum and dad were together.
Yeah.
So I didn't think that. I didn't need to think that. That thought never came into my mind because I didn't have any reason to think that. Because I had 2 sisters and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, we should probably mention that the other sibling is a brother. So yeah, without us, you wouldn't have any sisters. Yeah. Okay, because actually it's interesting. I had the same thing. I remember when I was really small, probably about 4 or 5. I'd not long started school, and I can't remember if it was a teacher or a parent, but someone said to me, because in how old we're talking early 90s, there wasn't many divorced parents back then. We were kind of a bit of an anomaly. And I remember one of them saying to me, oh, it must be really hard for you, your mum and dad not being together. And I remember turning around saying, no, my mum and dad don't like each other. Why would I want them to be together? It seemed bonkers to me at like 5. Why would you want 2 people who don't like each other to be in the same house? Because they didn't. They really struggled to have civil conversations or be in the same room or discuss, whose turn was it to buy the school shoes or agree holiday arrangements and things like that. It was a constant, battle, really. So, the idea of putting them together for more time than they needed to be was just crazy. But I did definitely, so I never wanted them to be together either. And to be honest, even to this day, I struggle to imagine what that would be like. They just seem so different. I can't imagine how that ever worked in practice, even though they were married for a lot of years. But I still can't see it. I can't picture it or fathom. They just seem too different. But I did really enjoy the 2 Christmases and the holidays and as you say, the extended family. And, as a result, we now obviously have our stepmom and our stepsister and stepbrother, and, all the nieces and nephews and family occasions that come with that, and actually grandparents as well. I think I was a lot closer to my step grandparents than I ever was to my biological grandparents. And that wouldn't have been possible without having the blended family that we have. So I wouldn't be without it either. And I think that's, even despite the arguing and despite the fact they couldn't get on, that's still my experience. I wouldn't change it. And if anything, I'd question how they were together in the first place rather than wanting them to be together now. So obviously then you've grown up and you've then kind of gone out into the world and you've looked at your childhood and said it was a happy one, and you've then decided to get married yourself. Going into that decision, do you think any of the fact that, you know, there was divorce in the family had any impact on your decision to marry, or who you married, or what you looked for in a husband?
I think I rushed into it. I think I felt I have to get married. I have to be married and have children and have a house. And by the age of 30, I had this it has to be 30. And I think because society tells us, you know, your clock is ticking away and you have to be married. And I think in hindsight, I rushed into it. I was too young, too immature, didn't know what I was doing. And we weren't really suited. And I just think I got married for totally the wrong reasons.
How old were you when you got married? We're trying to work this out.
24. Not very good at dates. About 24. Okay. I think 24, 25.
Okay. And you think it was society's kind of view on when you should be married and what you should have by the time you're 30, and kind of working back to 30 days. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think as well, sorry.
Yeah, no, go.
I think as well, when you go into a relationship with your mindset like that, I think you set yourself up to fail because you've gone into it for the wrong reasons. Because you're putting too much pressure on yourself. Like it's got to work, you want it to work, it needs to work, and then it doesn't.
Did you have any doubts before getting married?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. I remember Dad saying to me on the morning, "You don't have to go through this, girl." And I was like, no, it's fine. I will, it's fine. And I think I was thinking, you know, I can't back out now, it's too late. And I think as well, you worry it's not necessarily, you worry about what everyone else thinks. What is everyone going to think of me? What is everyone going to say? And I think that's the problem. I just think it's pressure.
Yeah.
Huge pressure.
I had exactly the same, I think. So I was 25 when I got married, and I knew full well that we weren't right together. And I had a massive freak out about it 2 weeks before the wedding. I was like, I can't go through with this. But the idea of backing out and letting everybody down, and all the money that had been paid, and just the whole idea. Hello, Sebastian. 2 seconds. Mommy. It's all right, we're recording, so if you wouldn't mind like grabbing him. No! I don't want to. Sorry. Okay, so apologies for the interruption. It's very much a family episode. So I felt the same kind of pressure of not wanting to let people down, and I knew full well that this wasn't right and that I shouldn't be going through with it. And I was too young, to be honest. And I think the reason I rushed into getting married was because at 21, sadly our dad died. And I think I met my ex-husband 6 months after Dad had died. And I think I was just trying to replace that kind of solid man in my life that was going to look after me and support me. And, you know, being the youngest by, you know, quite a way, I remember being at the funeral, and obviously you were there with John, and Denise was there with her husband, and, you know, and Neil and Kevin and everyone. And I was on my own, and I really wanted someone to look after me. And I think the next relationship I got involved in was the one that I was then, right, I've got to cling on to this and marry this guy. And actually we weren't right together any more than probably Mum and Dad were. And we were just going on very different trajectories, and it was never going to work in a million years, really. But I wanted it to, so I kind of convinced myself otherwise. I went through with it. And then, yeah, I think for the same reasons as you, then look to get out of it. So, and those reasons were because I think this is kind of the crux of the conversation, really, as to why you then decided to get divorced.
I think in your heart of hearts, you know when it's not right, you know. And I think we spent more time arguing, and we just wasn't nice to each other. And I think we didn't bring out the best in each other. And I think you look at yourself and think, you know, I'm better than this. And when you're arguing and fighting and trying to hurt hurt each other on purpose, and it's just not right. It's not the right path to go down, and you obviously don't care about that person because you don't then care if you hurt them. So you can't love them and care about them and want the best for them, and someone bringing out the worst in you is not a good thing, because it doesn't make you a good person. And then you have to look at yourself and think, this is just not right.
Yeah.
And I think, then in your heart of hearts, when you've got to get out, you've got to move on. For their sake as well, not just for your own. It's not, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was my experience as well, as I realized looking back that we fought all the time and argued, and I didn't ever approach that argument trying to resolve it for the benefit of both of us in our marriage. It was much more about point scoring and being right. And it wasn't about trying to remedy the situation or look at seeing it from their perspective. It was just, I needed to be right and he needed to be right. And there was no middle ground. And there was no kind of, working together to, whereas, the relationship that I have now with Ben is very different. I don't like arguing with Ben, and I want to fix whatever it is that we're disagreeing about. And that's a very different perspective to the one that I had with my ex, where it was just, no, I'm right, you're wrong. And I'm going to stick to this, and I'm going to prove that I'm right and you're wrong. It's a very different mentality, as you say, and it's bringing out the worst. But I think the other thing for me is I knew he was kind of wanting to have children, and I knew our marriage would never survive children, and I couldn't face co-parenting with someone like mum and dad had done. And I would worry about kind of sending my children off for the weekend, not knowing what I was going to have to deal with when they got back, because I wouldn't know what had been said. And that's how I remember my childhood of hearing things, not just from mum and dad, but from other relatives as well, about mum and dad and their marriage. And I didn't want that for my children. And I knew we weren't strong enough. Our relationship wasn't strong enough and wasn't the right environment to have kids. So the moment that children kind of came out, it was like, oh no, I do want to have children, but I don't want to have children with you, and it's not going to work, because I don't want to recreate what I'd experienced growing up with mum and dad. And that was kind of really my red flag for this is time to get out. And I think you had a similar experience of your ex sort of suggesting children were on the cards, and
definitely. I can actually remember sitting in my in-laws' kitchen, and I don't know if it was my husband or his mum or dad, one of them said about having children, and I actually sat there and I thought, I couldn't think of anything worse. I mean, that's just, that's horrible to think that, but that's just, we should never have got married at all. Not in the first place. And it's,
okay.
And children at all. You can't bring children into that relationship. And I think as well, with the arguing, I think we argued because, and you don't care. You don't care if you hurt somebody, because then you don't love somebody, because you can't. I think you can't love somebody if you intentionally want to hurt them and don't care if you do hurt them.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because people think the opposite to love is hate, but actually the opposite to love is indifference. And that's definitely where I got to. Whereas I just, as you say, it's the not caring, and it was the indifference of the situation. I didn't care whether we made up or how he felt about it. I just knew that I was angry or I was upset, and I wasn't thinking about anybody else in that situation. Okay, so then was there any part of you that worried about getting divorced? So how old were you when you got divorced? Your recollection of dates is brilliant.
Dates, births, weights. About 20, I think it was, I met John when I was 28. So I think it was around about then, 28.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, so you were married for about 3 years and then got divorced. So late 20s, so approaching your 30s, which was your big kind of, I have to be settled and be having children at 30. So you're cutting it fine for 2 years. Did you feel any pressure to stay in the marriage even though you weren't happy? Or were you kind of like, no, this is, no?
Not at all. It was done. No, not at all. No pressure. And I think it was a lot easier because it was only the two of us. We only had to deal with each other. There was no children involved. And I knew then after we divorced, I wouldn't have to see him. There was no reason to see each other. There's no reason to keep in touch, not with the extended family or the in-laws. There's nothing. It's just, and I think actually I've bumped into him 3 times in the whole of the 28 years or 25 years I've been with John.
Yeah.
And then we sort of nodded. We had the awkward moment, but there's no reason, is there? There's no reason for the contact. You don't have to keep in touch with somebody. So it is much easier, I think, when it's just the two of you rather than when you've got children involved.
Do you think the fact that your mum and dad were divorced had an impact on you not wanting to have children with your ex, in case that you ended up getting down the same route of co-parenting, even though your mum and dad did it, well? Do you still think that had an impact on your decision to walk away from the marriage before children were involved?
Probably. And I think as well, because we had such a volatile relationship and we just didn't get on at all, I think as well, I was quite immature at that time, even though I was like, 25, 26, 27, I was quite immature. So I don't think I was ready for children anyway. So I think it was just best just to walk away from it.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So because I felt when I got divorced that there was still a massive stigma, but I don't know whether that was partly as well as I was really conscious of not being tarred with the same brush as mum and dad, because obviously it's slightly different for you, because I know obviously dad had been married 3 times, but your mum had only been married once to our dad, whereas both my parents have married 3 times. And so I didn't want to be tarred with the, oh, well, it's another failed marriage kind of thing, and she's a chip off the old block. And I didn't want the comparison, and I didn't want to have failed, and I didn't want the judgment. And I remember I used to go to work and put my wedding rings on, and I didn't tell anyone I was getting divorced until it came through and I wanted to change my name back to my maiden name. And I never brought it up. I never discussed the fact that I was divorced. I didn't like ticking the divorced box on any forms. I felt really paranoid about the kind of the stigma and the failure around divorce. And I struggled with that quite a bit, I think, after the divorce. In fact, I was a similar age. So I was 27, 28 when the divorce came through. So the marriage lasted sort of 18 months before divorce proceedings were initiated. And so I felt like, it would be a case of she hasn't really given it a go, even though I'd been with him since I was 21. I just felt this massive failure and judgment around it, even though, to be honest, most people in our family are divorced, so that no one can really judge. But I still felt like that was going to be the case. Yeah, it is, if you think about it. I mean, my grandparents were divorced. It's just it is kind of, yeah. But I think because of that, I wanted to buck the trend. I didn't want to fall into that pattern of being yet another divorcee from a family that gets divorced. And I know when we did marriage counselling before going down the divorce route, and his parents had been married for like 40 years, and there was that was something that he really kind of used against me, in the fact that, oh, your family just fail at everything, they you just all give up kind of thing. And so I didn't want to do that, and I didn't want to be judged as to do that. So I think I really struggled with it, by the sounds of things, probably more so than you did, actually. But for the same reasons, it was good to not have that tie, and that was very much a reason to go through the divorce, was to not have the need to have that contact afterwards that can be so difficult when you have to co-parent together. So then what do you think it is that you kind of done differently or taken into your relationship with John, and why is that? Because I mean, you guys have been together 25 years next year.
I know.
No.
25 years.
Yeah, there's definitely got to be a party, a celebration or something. You know how I love to plan. So what is it? What's different about John and your relationship with John versus what it was with your ex? Why has that worked?
I think as well because we haven't put any pressure on ourselves, and we're best friends and we get on really well and we're comfortable and 100% ourselves with each other, with no pressure, and we've really just gone with the flow, really. We haven't planned anything. We haven't set ourselves up to fail. We haven't planned weddings, we haven't done anything. It's all just happened naturally, rather. I think.
And were you looking for John when you met him?
No, not at all. No, not at all. I remember when I met John, obviously John's been married before and he's got an elder daughter, and I remember him saying to me, like, I don't want to get married, I don't want to live together. I don't want a house. I don't want children. And I remember thinking, well, he's, really sure of himself. And I was like, I don't want that anyway. I don't want any of that. And then, 25 years later, we're still together, got 2 grown-up children. So you never know how things are going to work out. I think that's what it is. I think as well, we just don't take ourselves too seriously as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And you and John aren't married. Is that a conscious decision, do you think?
I think that's me. I think John would get married tomorrow, but I think it's me.
Okay. Why do you think that is?
I think as well, because now we've been together so long, I just have this feeling that, why change anything? We've been together so long. Why do we need to be married? And you hear so many stories as well, which I try not to listen to, of people that have been together for years and years, have fantastic relationships. They get married, and for whatever reason, they end up getting divorced or splitting up or going their separate ways. And I think maybe that's at the back of my mind.
Okay.
Maybe I'll just get married one day and come back and tell you. I got married yesterday. I don't know.
Okay. See, that's interesting, because I was similar. Well, you were there when I met Ben. So similar. I didn't put any pressure on Ben and I either. I wasn't looking for Ben. I wasn't expecting to settle down or meet anyone or anything, and just to had no expectations whatsoever, and again kind of went with the flow. But unlike you, I was very adamant that I wanted to get married before we had children, and I wanted to have the same name on the birth certificate, and that was really important to me, to the point where we actually got married. God, I was 7 months pregnant with Sebastian when we got married, because the wedding was planned for the year after, and I wanted that, and I don't know why I felt insistent on having that family set up and that security, and that I feel that kind of in my head marriage was offering. With Ben, that it was such a thing for me to really push to do. It's interesting, and I still don't know, even sitting here now, why that is. But the relationship is very different, and I knew that the relationship was very different, and I didn't have any concerns about having children with Ben or getting married to Ben or thinking that it wouldn't work, that I had before. All those doubts, everything that I felt before with my ex, none of that this time round. And the relationship is very different, and I like what you said actually about it being a friendship first, and maybe because there's not that pressure and expectation, you can kind of become friends and get to know one another and like one another before you actually then put any labels on it or do any kind of big things like having children or moving in or whatever it is. And that's maybe why it's a stronger foundation, perhaps, and not taking, as you say, each other too seriously or yourselves too seriously, and having that kind of light-hearted friendship relationship that you perhaps didn't have with your ex, and I certainly didn't have with mine. And maybe that's the difference. Do you think there's a thing of when you know?
Definitely, 100%. I definitely believe in that. When you meet that person, that one person, I definitely think that.
Yeah. Okay. So if you were to give yourself some advice, your younger self, or you're the 23, 24-year-old you who was getting married, or somebody else who's the the children of divorce, about kind of relationships and what you've learned, what would you tell them, or a younger version of you?
I think, thinking back now, I just think you've just got to just not rush into anything. I think you've just got to take your time, just grow as a person yourself. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Don't expect too much. And just, you'll meet somebody when the time is right. And I believe when you're meant to meet somebody, and it will all fall in place. I think not putting too much pressure on yourself. I think that's the thing. Definitely.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because before Ben, I'd kind of gone for what I decided was my type or my perfect person, and they were completely wrong for me. And on paper, if you'd put Ben and I together on paper, you'd gone, no. I don't think you would put us together at all.
Right,
even when we met, I think you'd look at the two of us and go, really? but actually it works really well. And I think that's the thing, is you have this idea, don't you, and this ideal that's kind of created by society of, you know, boy meets girl at this age and they are like this and they've got this career and they've got this going for them and they've had these experiences, and, you know, it all comes together perfectly in harmony. And it just, humans don't work like that. We're emotional beings and we all come with our own hang-ups, whether you've got divorced parents or not. You all come with your own conditioning over the years. It's all subconscious, and your own belief system and your own kind of highs and lows and experiences and triggers and everything else, and you've got to come together with another person and make that work. And actually there's no kind of perfect equation that says, you know, X meets Y and, you know, it's perfect. So I think you're right. I think not putting yourself under that kind of pressure or trying to live up to those social norms is really important. And equally, would you give any advice to parents who are divorcing with children and co-parenting, from your experience as being a child in that situation? What would you say to them?
I think as well, you've got to try and take a step back and look at it from the child's point of view, and just try and see the bigger picture and the impact it's going to have on the child, really. And try, not saying you're never going to be best of friends, but just try and be amicable for the children's sake, as much as you can, really. Yeah,
because I know you and I have talked in the past about sort of saying things or arguing in front of, because even with your divorced or not, you're still going to have disagreements with your partner about, you know, raising the children and co-parenting, etc. Because again, you're coming with very different backgrounds and ideas on what you think. But you're very adamant and always have been about, you never show any of that to the boys, and you've always been very, very good at doing that. And I think and is that because you didn't see that with your mum and dad and that really worked for you, do you think?
Yeah, and I didn't want them to have that memory of us arguing and fighting, and because we remember that, and I didn't want them to have that memory of their childhood. It's not fair on them. No. And I think that's what was important to us.
Yeah, because as I say, that happens whether you're divorced or not. You know, you're still not going to always agree necessarily, but I guess it's how you choose and where you choose to have those conversations or discussions, or heated discussions as they can sometimes be, and the environment that you're choosing to create for your children, divorced or, as I said, or not. Okay, that's really helpful. I think, yeah, I agree with you. The trying to not bow down to this social idea of what marriage or divorce is. I think it's a very antiquated perspective of, you know, marriage is a success and divorce is a failure. And think getting into a relationship for the right reasons, and working at that relationship, but equally if the relationship isn't going right, knowing when to walk away as well, I think is just equally as important. Because I hear so often about people staying together for the kids, and I think from what we've both said in this call, there is no staying together for the kids if you're not right together. A happy marriage, an unhappy marriage is no better than a divorce if you do the divorce well. And your experience obviously of divorce is very different to mine, and has had a better outcome, even though you've got divorced yourself, so it still had a repercussion, but you can choose to do things better. So I would say, yeah, knowing when to get out and getting in for the right reasons is really, really crucial.
And I do think that, I think you're right. Everybody thinks, and I think they still think, we must stay together for the children. And I think that's what's got to change, because it's doing more harm than good, really.
Yeah, definitely. And today we do have a very, very blended. We're not quite as unusual as we once were. I think we were kind of the unusual family that had so many sort of strings to it, but we're kind of, the modern family, a lot of modern families are blended now, and actually, that can be a really good thing. And I personally wouldn't be, obviously you came before me, but I wouldn't be without you guys or without our step siblings as well, and the relationship that we all have with them and our stepmom and their family. So I think, there can be some real positives that come out of it when it's done well, and you can get to that point where you can still be a family and all be together. And instead of looking at the times that we've had with your mum, or, you've had with mine, and even today, you know, we do things, and you know, you'll still socialize with my mum, and she knows your boys, and you know, it's lovely. And I think you miss all of that if you stay together in an unhappy marriage that actually ends up causing just as much damage to your children, if not more. So there's definitely some benefits and some positives to take away from it as well. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on here, because I know it's not something that you normally do, and it took me a bit of convincing to get you here, so thank you very much, and for sharing your story, because
I've enjoyed it.
Oh, good. I think it is important though, and I think it really helps people to hear, you know, other people's experiences and perspectives, because also I think divorce is a really, really lonely place to be, and you often think that it's only you that's feeling like this, who has failed, and it's hard to know where to go for that support and advice and experience. So I'm sure it'll be helpful to people watching. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Right, I'm going to stop.